Okay, let's get going. We want to respect everybody's time and keep this to an hour or less, depending on the number of questions. I'd like to again introduce myself. I'm Rick Bantelman, the VP of Sales at MyWorkDrive. And joining us today is Scott Miller, one of our lead engineers, who is going to help me out with the admin demo. And if anyone comes up with any questions that I can't handle technically, Scott's certainly going to be able to do that. So let's get ready and just kind of level set what we're going to do. We will do a quick presentation just on who we are, what we are, because we have our audience is some folks that are current customers, some people that are interested in MyWorkDrive in becoming a customer. We're going to cover as if we'll cover what's new, but we'll also cover things so people can see the whole suite. And so some of you that are current customers may want to get off when we get to the admin panel because you're familiar with it. So just wanted to say that. And also, if you could leave questions till the end, we will address those and put those in the chat window. So let's go right now, and we will share my screen and get going. So MyWorkDrive, secure remote file share access. I always put the tagline without the need for VPN on there. For today, why MyWorkDrive? What is MyWorkDrive? Product demo, roadmap, and Q&A. Current customer set. We have a suite of customers across all verticals. We have governments, we have transportation, lots of education, and just legal. We have all over the world, the United States. In fact, we just got back from a Microsoft Ignite show in London, very well received, and we're looking for a lot of opportunities out of there. So yeah, here's our customers, which I already said. And what are we? We are secure remote file access through web browser, map drive, mobile, and Office Online. So we'll get into all of that in detail in a bit. MyWorkDrive security features, ADFS, SAML, Duo. So we have several out of the box. Single sign-on vendors, but also you can configure us just as a SAML if you're not in our list, which is highly unlikely. No compromising file security, kind of a corny expressions, but we say no data left behind. And data leak prevention with encrypted actor authentication, and we'll touch on that as well. And the data leak prevention is why we are so compliant with many of the requirements that are out there. And there we go, compliance, government, HIPAA, FIPS, GDPR, GSA, FedRAMP. Data leak prevention, again, you'll see that. A lot of people, when they see DLP, think of the data loss, but we've coined it for what we do with data leak. Office 365, the interface we have with that is very nice, and we'll show it. Direct editing of documents in Office 365 online. Edit documents directly from the browser or mobile client. That's very neat when you see how we can go either way with that. And a couple of slides here I have that I could stumble over or invite Scott to talk about because he can make a lot more sense out of this for your technical folks. Scott, if you would.
Sure. There's a multitude of ways you can deploy MyWorkDrive in your environment. The most important thing is that it sits next to the file shares for performance. But you're going to put it behind typical firewalls. We're connecting to the existing infrastructure, Active Directory, and SMB via CIFS, and providing that out to the world via port 443. So there's, 443. So there's no SMB access. You don't need to worry about what kind of internet connections your users have or opening ports that have security concerns.
Great. Let me take you to that one.
Something new that we added in 5.4 is our integration with Cloudflare. We've always had a reverse proxy, but Cloudflare gives us a little bit more security and some greatly improved performance without the need to open inbound ports on your server. It requires just 2 outbound ports to connect. And so we're really excited about this in 5.4, both from a security standpoint and a performance standpoint.
Great. And I was looking at this slide earlier in preparation. I'm thinking, I'll let Scott go with this one too.
Yeah, kind of sort of those benefits I was just talking about. The fact that it's a reverse proxy, you don't need to map inbound ports or set up SSL certificates or anything like that. Uses Cloudflare's Argo tunneling service. Another advantage to that really is performance. Cloudflare has their own internet backbone and can avoid choke points and congestion points. So we even see performance improvements when using the reverse proxy over a direct connection. The MyWorkDrive server becomes protected because you're no longer exposing opening ports. There's Cloudflare's built-in sort of filtering, and you see a little bit of that outcome as with that A+ rating on Qualys, and of course you don't need to deploy your own reverse proxy on site just to run MyWorkDrive. Of course, we already have one. We work compatibly just fine with those, but this gives the advantage of having that without the need to deploy it specifically for us.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to get right into the demo very quickly. We'll give you a brief overview of web client, MapDrive, and our mobile client. And we'll jump right into that. So first, this is the login screen for the web browser. Scott will show you that, of course, we support single sign-on and Duo. Just showing you here, we actually have some customers that have not implemented any of those. So they would just get in using their NT Windows credentials. So that's what this is an example of. And so one of the things I always like to say at this point is I have yet in my 2 years at MyWorkDrive been asked to do any end user training, because everybody goes, well, this is simple enough. If you understand Windows File Explorer, you understand what you're seeing here. So if you look over on the left, these are the network shares that I get to see based on my underlying NT credentials. So NTFS credentials. So you can see here they are. They could be all of them. It could be some of them, whatever the admin of MyWorkDrive has deemed to make visible through MyWorkDrive. So these are the shares. These are the files within those shares. It's like a directory listing. They're not actually brought anywhere. Keep in mind, and I'm sure all of you realize, we are not sync and share. So these files really don't get copied anywhere. It's going to be direct access when we do that. So if you look across a little bit about the real estate on top, I have full-blown access based on my underlying NTFS credentials. So here's edit, online, share, copy. I can do all of these things. Based on somebody else's permissions, you may or may not see that. So just to show you here are the files. What can I do with the share? I can share a file internally, again, if I have the permissions to do that. I can, for third-party reviewing, throw it over the wall, I like to say, to OneDrive, or share via Outlook. So those are our sharing methods. Very, very cool here is obviously I can edit this online, but we also have the ability to edit from the browser locally. So that's a nice feature that we have, that you actually don't need Office 365 to use the web browser. So let's go a little bit further. And we support favorites. Let's say one of your shares have their nested folders within there. So the user can add a favorite and for easier access next time. And change views, you can change views. As you saw, we had a list view, but we can also make it thumbnails. So getting back to here, which I already spoke about, that slide looks a tad redundant. Let's click on this market definition doc. Now here's what I was referring to earlier. I have the choice of editing this in my local office on my local computer, and this is the experience that I would get. Or I could say edit online. And when I do that, I like to say here, we're specially licensed by Microsoft to do it this way. From the user perspective, it's very easy. They click on the document, it takes them right to this screen which you're looking at, and the file is actually brought to the browser along with the Office functionality. So the file really isn't temporarily copied anywhere. It's all real time as to what's happening. And this assumes here that I am an Office 365 user and can edit. So I can make changes, I can make changes, and also for co-editing, because Office supports that. Multiple people can edit this document at the same time. You would see Rick is editing here, Scott is editing there. And each keystroke is saved right back through MyWorkDrive back to where it lives in that network share. Moving along, we talked about this real quick. I can share this internally. And if I do, here's a shortcut that I can put, copy, paste, and send to other people using my WorkDrive. So that is how we can share any of these files internally. I can share via Outlook. Here it is. This is Office 365 Outlook. Again, keep in mind only if the permissions allow me to do all of that. And then share via OneDrive, assuming I have the OneDrive account, either personally or the business edition. And what kind of permissions do you want to put on it? And once it goes to OneDrive, it's 100% OneDrive functionality, and the initiator who put that in OneDrive in the first place would put it back into my WorkDrive. Now, moving on from there, we'll go to the MapDrive client installation. The reason I want to show that is because of this. Are you wanting to open Office files in Office Online instead of locally? So we have plenty of clients, big ones, that are transitioning from E3 to E1 licenses, or F3 to F1, depending on, I think, on what it's called. But so it's very unique that with a MapDrive, you don't need to have local Office, and this would launch the Office 365, similar to what you saw when we did it with the browser. So here would be your client login. This is something that you, if you do a map at startup, the user would never see. So this client it's an MSI, so this could be a silent install for your users that they would not have to go through the act of actually installing it, and this would show up. This can be, the map drive can be a single drive letter, or it can be a mapped drive to match the way you're currently doing things today. So just here's some of the options. So we are a true mapped drive in every sense of the word. We operate the same. Again, I talk about no training. People see the drive that we expose, drive or drives. They know exactly inherently how to do that. What we do add above is these two features here, the allow list and the block list. Basically saying, hey, let's block PST. This is from the user perspective. Let's not let them add PSTs or movie files or anything like that. Doesn't make sense to the network share. Or we can conversely say only allow these files, Word, Excel, blah, 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 whatever extensions make sense from the business perspective. And then here is how it looks. So the user does not know. They've got a C drive, a D drive, and a traditional network drive. But this F, G, and H drive are the MyWorkDrive drives. So very, very, again, very intuitive. And from the user perspective, they don't really know or care how they're hooked up to that. And then here's something very interesting through the map drive. Here's a shortcut. I can take this link and copy it and paste it into an email, and other MyWorkDrive users can get to that file. But what we've recently implemented is the UNC path, where you can send this UNC path to any user and they can access it just through the regular network without being a MyWorkDrive user and using one of the seats. So that's a nice feature that we've added. And a little bit more on the map drive. We're just showing some more things. So here it is. Let me go further down. That's it. That's actually it. Let me just go back here to finish up all of that. There you go. So now let's jump on to the mobile. And we have, of course, for iOS and Android. I'm going to concentrate on this on the iOS because it has some more features, but what's available in the regular Android will work similar. So here is the login panel. Of course, we support mobile SAML and ADFS login. A nice feature we have is the user can log in with their email address and will resolve back to the address of the MyWorkDrive server. So here's the interface, demo share that we looked at earlier. The user can choose a thumbnail view or list. And okay, here again is that document. I can open it up, be in read-only mode. Maybe that's all I need to do. Or, as you can see, I can click here, and maybe I need to attach this as an email. I'm remote someplace, I access. Somebody gives me a call, I have to send an email, it can go out. Or maybe I need to do some light editing on that. Well, in this case, I'm attaching it directly to an email. But before I do that, maybe I need to do some light editing. So I can open it up on the Word client on the device, and here it is, and do some editing on there. And this is, by the way, it's mobile, so it is either iOS, tablet, or iPad, or iPhone. And then we can go down here to, here's that same document. Maybe we need to take that offline. In the unlikely event these days that you are in an unconnected mode, you can and you know you're going to be there, you can download and advance these files to the device. And then they would be in the download folder, and you could access them, maybe fill out a fillable PDF or complete a Word document where you need to capture information, and go from there. And then lastly, on the mobile, is you can save attachments. So here's my, actually it's my insurance card for my motorcycle. I could save directly to my WorkDrive. And there it is. I could save it to completed forms, and it shows up there. Now, if you don't need to or care to load our client, you can just open up Office documents and add us as a place. So my WorkDrive would be a place, and this would be your experience on how that would work. So really, when you think about it, there's many ways on a mobile device to access. One is through the client, one is through just the browser, and the other one would be through this way, is adding as a place. And just to show you some instances or examples, you can open up on MyWorkDrive in a local application. And this would be opening up a PDF, maybe in PDF Expert, and fill it out that way. Slack, you can store your Slack content in MyWorkDrive because we're viewed as a location, and do it that way. And at this point, that really wraps up my part, and we'll throw this over to Scott to give a demo of how the admin panel works. And this is the point where maybe some of the people that are already customers and using the demo may want to move on. But if you want to stay, absolutely, I wish you would. And this for new people, Scott's going to take you right through how it all works. So let me do that. And here we go. Going to go here. I'm going to stop sharing and make Scott a presenter. More. And there you go, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Rick. Yeah, like Rick said, there's not a lot that's changed in the admin panel with our 5.4 release. Most of the improvements we made were in the performance of file transfers, of downloads, and then, of course, the integration of Cloudflare. But definitely want to walk you through this, show you some of the things that are in here. We'll talk about some best practice elements. If there are questions on this, why, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll certainly answer them at the end, or you can always reach out to us on our support at MyWorkDrive, or just myworkdrive.com and click on the support link. So the administrative tools, those of you who haven't seen this or we use a refresher, it's you launch them from the control panel app on your desktop, as you just saw me do. Remember, we don't keep any kind of databases. We authenticate you against the Active Directory. So there is no MyWorkDrive user or administrator or default kind of password or anything. And as you can see, I'm no better at getting into my password than anybody else. So when the first time you log in, you'll actually get this wizard, which walks you through the basic steps of creating your first share and putting the server online using our Cloud Web Connector, that Argo Tunnel, Cloudflare Argo Tunnel that we mentioned a little bit ago. You only see this once. You don't ever need to go back to this. Most of the time you'll log in, and as you saw, you'll land on the Shares tab. We try to make MyWorkDrive something that you set up once, and then you don't need to do duplicate administration on. As you manage users, you'll do that through Active Directory, and we'll pull those permissions in, and things will just work. So for a lot of you who are customers and haven't been in here for a while, that's pretty normal, right? We hope that's your experience. Starting from the top, Rick had mentioned the ability when you're using the map drive to show a drive letter, and those of you who maybe have been around for a while will remember that we used to map everything under a single drive letter. Now we give you the ability as the administrator to push those out, and you can now mirror your office environment. So people who have an H drive, in air quotes, when they're in the office and they've connected and gotten their push from group policy or logon script, you can give them the exact same experience and functionality. One thing that is new here is the test tool. And something that anyone who's deployed an SSO knows or has seen is that in some instances or when you're using an SSO for login, we require you to configure delegation. You probably, if you've been here, seen those screens that say, you know, warning, don't forget to set delegation. These test tools allow you to do some light testing to determine if, say, shares are coming up blank or shares aren't showing up for a given user. You can actually test to see whether your Active Directory is configured correctly to allow them access. So that's new. And then, of course, the general elements in shares, the defining of them. Typically, yours will be a UNC path. Our demo server just happens to have everything configured on one, so this uses a local path. But generally, these are your UNC paths, your shares. Doesn't matter if they're a Windows share, a DFS share, hosted on the server, or even on an appliance. As long as they're shares on the Active Directory that use NTFS permissions, you should be fine there. I'll come back to these download, upload, and use green radio buttons in just a second to say you've got a user list that is all of the elements in your Active Directory, users and groups. And then on the right, you've got the ones that are actually configured on MyWorkDrive. When you set this up the first time, it actually will import, so these mirror what's on your Active Directory. You have the ability to make MyWorkDrive more restrictive. So in this case, for example, if I wanted to take the ProTech user out, I could remove them, and that would prohibit them from having access remotely when they're not in the office. It doesn't make any change to your Active Directory. They'd still have their regular permissions to the SMP share in the office, but when they're outside, you can remove them. It's an added level of security. What you can't do is add security that doesn't exist on the Active Directory through this interface. So I can't go in and add and say, well, I want to add the demo user to this share. Well, you can. You would have to do that in the Active Directory. You wouldn't do that here. Typically, you wouldn't add individual users at all here. These would be groups. As I mentioned, we don't want you to have to do duplicate administration. So you would have here your administrators, your domain users, your other groups that exist on your Active Directory. And then as you make changes in the Active Directory, adding and remove users, they filter up to MyWorkDrive. Now, these green radio buttons are enabled because we have that DLP, that data leak prevention that Rick talked about, enabled. And this gives you a finer level of control over the users and groups as to the functionality they can have. Downloading files, editing online in Office. You can turn these on and off by share or by individual user. Again, adding more restrictions to improve your security. Note that if you do enable DLP on a share, it no longer shows up in mobile clients or on, actually it probably does show up on mobile clients, but it doesn't show up in the MapDrive client because we can't control Windows security, and users would still have the ability to copy and paste and do things like that. But this will still permit them access in the web client. We also have a newer feature. This is not a 5.4 feature, but it's newer than a lot of other features around shared user access. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it gets a little bit complicated, but what it does is it grants you or gives you the ability to allow a user multiple logins and limited permissions. Good for instances where you want to collect information from users. You can permit them upload or provide information in a lightly secured, it's not individually secured, but lightly secured multi-user access. So we have educational institutions that want to share like course outlines, or we have some other financial institutions that want to share lightly sensitive things, obviously not like individual statements or anything like that, but things that they may not want the general public. So that's in here, and a detailed description of this, a detailed description of all of these features is available in our support articles. If you have questions about it, we're happy to send you links to them, talk you through it, walk you through it. You can add new shares. This is the same interface as that wizard. You'll see it's all the same as I mentioned. When you do it, it'll import your new user. A good way to get the path is usually just copy it from Windows Explorer. So I usually just browse to Windows Explorer and pull that up. The meat of the conversation here is really around settings, and then there's a handful of settings in enterprise as well. If you're upgrading, something that I tell everyone to take a look at when they finish their upgrade is make sure that your license is activated in presence. Particularly if you're coming from really old versions, jumping multiple versions, you may need to reapply your license key. Simple, easy, real quick to do. The Cloud Web Connector, again, now this is new in 5.4, not new, but changed heavily. And we're now using the Cloudflare protected tunnels. There's a link, a little bit of link to get more info. Those of you who are on this, you'll be seamlessly migrated from our existing Portbridge Cloud Web Connector to the new Cloudflare one with your name and email. This email is used to notify you of system events. It's not used to spam you marketing materials, so don't worry about that. And a few people asked me about that over time. And Office 365 enabling, if you're an Office 365 client, you can enable this and it will set up. Now, both of these, when you enable them, take a few minutes to provision, so it's not immediate. Wait when you do that till you get the email from us, from our system that says, hey, everything's up and running and live. We also support you hosting Office Online locally, so if you're hosting your Office 365 experience on a local server, you can configure that. You can also disallow local web editing, as Rick showed you. When you're either in the web client, you can double click that, or you can click that and get the edit local option. You can turn that off if you want to increase your security, have everything going through Office 365. And in complement to that, you can choose what that double click does, just save your users time. If you're exclusive open locally, you can set that. If you're exclusive open online, you can set that, of course. Require SSL is good in the direct connection world to, skip having to do any kind of redirects. Of course, port 80 is not advised any longer. You'll want to set up, particularly if you're in a direct connection situation, set up your SSL certificate and turn that on. There's a host of other settings in here. You can require email username format. If you're in a high security environment, you're just using the map drive, you can actually turn the web client off. This is actually a new feature in 5.4. You've always had the ability to do this, and we've talked people through doing it, manually editing the configuration files, but we now have a radio button for that. Rick showed you enabling the mapper client and the block and allow list, and also the minimum version. With each upgrade, we do introduce new features, and occasionally people will want to choose to not allow the older versions because they don't want people using those features, or they want people taking advantage of the newer features, such as the SSO logins that we now support. We've supported for a long time, so you can choose to do that. Very similar with the mobile client. You can pick minimum versions if you want to force people to take advantage of certain things, certain new features that we've been added. This is a question that gets asked a lot. We are not a WebDAV. We do not require WebDAV. We are not connecting by a WebDAV, but we do have the ability to be a WebDAV server for your environment. This comes up. This is less common than it used to be, but perhaps you have an older multifunction device in the office that it was only able to write to shares via WebDAV. While you can enable that, and you will support scan to MyWorkDrive, things like that. But by default, I would disable this for security, unless you know you need it in your environment. Rick talked about those sharing features. You can choose to turn those on and off to be compliant to company policy or functionality and feature. If you don't have a OneDrive account, you don't want people using their personal OneDrive accounts, that kind of thing. Rick talked about favorites. Favorites is a newer feature, so we do have the ability to turn that off, and gives you the ability to choose your path, because if you're running in a clustered environment, we do support clustering, you want to make sure that you put that in a shared common location that all the servers can access, so that people's favorites follow them as they hop on and off different machines behind your load balancer. This is a new feature in 5.4, which is the ability to specify an outbound proxy. This lets people who need an outbound proxy specify. Search, we support both the Windows search and an enterprise product called DT search. There's complete configuration instructions in our support articles, and we'll spend a lot of time on that. Some more basic things, naming, English, if you can include your users' home directories, if you typically have home directories configured in Windows logon services or group policy, why you can also map those here. And you can choose to not allow people who don't have access to other shares, prevent them in essence from logging into MyWorkDrive. It's kind of a double negative and can be a little bit confusing. Another new feature we added is the ability to specify a different file size limit for general use, web client, mobile clients versus the map drive. A lot of interest in people either being increasing security on one side or the other, so we broke that out to let you set those independently. The email domain website lookup is something that gets underutilized. We actually were talking about that on an engineering call this morning. And what this is, as Rick mentioned, when you're on the mobile client, you can put in your email address to log in, and we will look up what your server URL is to save you from having to type all of that on the mobile client. And that's how that's done. That's how that is done, is you add the email domain and what your MyWorkDrive server URL is, and then we can do that lookup. Log level, this is not a new feature, but in recent versions, we added the ability to trim your number of log storing days. I know some of you who've been clients for a really long time, and some of you who will be clients for a really long time will generate a lot of log data. So we give you the ability to clean that out automatically. I would generally recommend you leave your log level on error, unless we specifically ask you to increase it to help us troubleshoot a problem that you may be having. There's just no reason to log that much activity unless you really need it. And session timeouts, one note about these did change, again, not in 5.4, but in a more recent version. These are now absolute or fixed timeouts. They used to be idle timeouts. And we found that going to the fixed timeout was better because it provides you more granular control over how long someone can remain logged in to a given client, or as you see, mobile and map drive, or on a type of computer versus that mobile. So you can be restrictive. These are our defaults. You likely will choose to change them. The last thing I'd like to point out on the settings tab before I move over to Enterprise is the import and export feature. This lets you save a copy of your settings. So if you're doing disaster recovery planning and want to copy your settings off board, if you're upgrading and just want to take a copy of them in case there's an issue during the upgrade, or if you're running in a multi-server environment and want to save yourself from having to do the setup repeatedly, you can use the import and export feature. This will capture the critical system files and configuration favorites, things like that. Stepping over to Enterprise. Enterprise, down at the bottom here, has all of your branding tools that Rick had mentioned. Branding this to you, your likeness, colors, logos, things of that nature. That's down here at the bottom. The meat of it is really at the top, where you can choose to enable and configure SSO logins. We have a number of, as Rick mentioned, we have a number of default providers, but we also give you the ability to do any that you like by hand using manual. Then at that point, you will be moving certificates around and moving metadata config files around. But if you choose one of our automated ones, as you can see, it's very simple. We prompt one thing at a time. We ask for one URL and give you the ability to do a configuration. And the server will, in the background with our pre-configured clients or with our pre-configured partnerships, configure this all for you in the background. So we've made it become very easy. Two-factor, as Rick mentioned, is using Duo. We have Duo configured. What we found is a lot of our clients are going to two-factor built into their SAML or their SSO provider. So the environment there is, we then don't need to know about your two-factor, because the sequence is someone asks to log into MyWorkDrive either by coming to the MyWorkDrive address or clicking on the link in the SSO's directory. They're authenticated by the SSO through whatever means they need to be: username and password, authenticator, token, certificate, whatever you have configured in your environment. And then when authorized by the SSO provider, they're passed over to MyWorkDrive with basically, in essence, an authorization that says, yes, this person may log in. Stephanie is authorized to MyWorkDrive. Scott is authorized to MyWorkDrive. So at that point, you don't need to do anything about the two-factor with us, because it's handled by your SSO. One note about SSOs that I mentioned earlier, and I want to just make another point, is that when you enable an SSO, you have to enable the MyWorkDrive server to do delegation to your file shares. So there is a warning box that will pop up when you save, and there's also pretty detailed instructions in our support articles. It's really simple to do in Active Directory. We use CIFs to communicate, so it's secure, but you do have to take that extra step if you're connecting with an SSO. Data leak prevention, we've talked a lot about this. It's a really valuable feature in compliance and security environments. This is where you turn it on and set your watermark text. You have the option to, I mentioned those radio buttons on the share. You can also deploy things globally. And this is good for very high security environments or urgent times of concern, save you from having to edit a host of shares. You can enable that here at the highest level. The last thing I'll talk about in Enterprise's previous versions, that works with the Windows volume snapshots. And you have to have volume snapshots configured in order for that to work, but gives the user the ability through the web client to actually right-click and get to their previous versions and look for previous files without having to come back to the help desk or IT to say, hey, I made an error in a document, overwrote it with an old version or whatever. Can you help me get it back? Moving on, alerts is a really neat feature which will send you emails. It uses basic email, has SMTP settings. You can enable, obviously, enable authenticating to your SMTP server as well, about thresholding of, in this case, user activity, number of files, in this case, downloaded in a certain period of time or deleted in a certain period of time. Good for monitoring for inappropriate user activity, someone who may be attempting to copy things in a situation where they shouldn't, maybe trying to back up their data because they're separating from the company, but also for non-user initiated activity, malware, and events. Good way to keep it on top of that. Of course, we also write all of these things to logging, and you can get a rudimentary snapshot view of the activities that are going on in here. This one is a little bit more verbose than normal because we have debugging on, but you can see login events, source of logins, file activities, things of that nature. We also keep these logs. Of course, you can export them, you can search for them, you can filter them. We also keep these logs as text files on the operating system. So if you want to take these over to a log reader or a log monitoring program, Elk, Spunk, Sumo Logic, something like that, you certainly can. We have a lot of clients who do that kind of thing. And of course, as I mentioned, the wizard is here. You don't ever need to go through this, but it is in the menu. Just walks you through those initial couple steps of getting your first share, setting up remote access and that kind of thing. Rick, did I miss anything? Rick maybe is muted, and I may be, because I am the host, need to unmute Rick. So let's see if we can do that here real quick. And I'll get, there you go, Rick. Now you should be good to go.
There you go. Perfect, Scott. Thank you very much. Hey, can you do one thing for me? Because we had something come in from the chat window that would just, the DLP, can you just log in through as a user and show in the DLP what that would look like? I showed the example when we clicked on a file going to the browser. I'm sorry, going to Office 365. So
yeah, just log in. Just log into the you're saying just log into the web client.
Exactly. If you could, and then
Sure.
We've got a share set up there. That would be great if you could do that.
I did see the I saw the. So when I log into the web client real time, it notes that some elements of these shares have DLP on for them for me. And in this case, we know that the demo share in the DLP section does. And so if I open any of these files, I open that market definition doc that you saw,
Perfect.
What it's going to do is it's going to note who logged in. And this is obviously domain and user, date, time, and then whatever watermark you write on that section, it's going to show that. Copy and paste is removed here, print is removed here. So really the only thing I could do is take a picture of this, but of course, then I've got all the watermark and the notation on it about it being DLP. Rick, is that what you wanted me to show?
That's exactly right. Thank you so much. Got another question for you, Scott.
Sure.
There's a question on registering email domains for mobile client. When
Okay.
the user enters the email address, does MyWorkDrive assume the prefix of the email address for the AD account? This is not the case for us by default. So not exactly sure.
Yeah, and the question is not clear to me, but let me just put one in here and I'll show you how it works.
Okay.
And the server software is not designed to be simultaneously logging into both the server and the web client. So forgive me while I get
okay.
logged in.
There's clarification on that. It says for the mobile client, not the website.
Well, right. The email lookup domain only works on the web client, or on the mobile client, rather.
Mm-hmm.
Get logged in here. So when I set this up, I'm going to enter the domain name. So in this case, myworkdrive.com. So I would be Scott at MyWorkDrive, Rick at MyWorkDrive, etc. And then the login for our server. Demo, rather, I'm sorry. So once I've done this, anyone who has a username at myworkdrive.com is going to get redirected to this in the mobile client login. And as you see, you can add more than one. So if I also wanted to cover wanpath.net, if we had email addresses at wanpath.net, I could do the exact same thing. So now any user who enters it, and yes, we'll strip off the prefix of their username. We'll just look for the domain and redirect to that.
Okay.
Of course, remember when you make changes in here to scroll to the top and or the bottom of the page and click the save button. And do note when you save, if there are issues with data that you have entered, if you enter incorrect information, it will actually give you a warning, different colors depending on if it's green, we saved it, orange, there's a warning, or red, there's an error. You'll get a warning message up here. So don't save and exit, save and make sure you see the message that pops up there at the top.
Great. Okay. So I can see there's some questions. Dan is actually answering them in the chat window regarding mobile access and logging in with the email address. Other than that, I don't see, let's see, I think that's it in all of the chat. So last minute questions for anybody. It's now 15 minutes till the hour. So let's see.
One thing I will show while people are putting their questions in, if you haven't seen it, if you go to myworkdrive.com, there's a support link here at the top of the page, and we've got quite a number of articles down here, not just in the ones that show up in this grid, but if you search for, say, I mentioned delegation a few times. If you search in here, you'll find a wealth of information about different functions. I mentioned that when you set these up, you have to go through it. And we work really hard as an organization to give you pretty good documentation with screen grabs and links to other services. So don't be afraid to use that. And if you find something that is wrong or confusing or something in here, why, feel free to let us know. You can always, I think one of the first things on here is you can email us or visit our help desk portal. We are always happy to take feedback on our support documentation.
Great, thanks, Scott. There's another one that just came in. After a client is set up, do drives get mapped automatically?
So as you mentioned, on that first login, you get the option to choose whether you want to save your login or not. If you save your login, then yes, on each boot, if you do, and the administrator allows it, you noticed on the administrator panel, you can choose whether you allow people to save their passwords or not. Then they will automatically happen for you going forward. If you don't choose that option or the administrator doesn't allow saving, then no, they'll actually have to run the client to have them mapped.
Okay, great.
And there are some, let me elaborate one more thing. There are tools to push out default configurations in the command line. As you mentioned, you can extract the installer, run it as an MSI, include it in an MDM or in group policy, and you can set some measure of configuration variables for people who are logging on to a domain. You can push it out that way. So,
cool. All right. Got a couple more coming in. Can you talk about costs on using Cloudflare? Any costs with MyWorkDrive or just using the Cloudflare service? And then what levels of service do customers subscribe to? That's a loaded question, huh?
Yeah. So on the Cloudflare side, there is no charge from MyWorkDrive to use our shared Cloudflare configuration, although you are limited to 100 megabytes per individual file. So that's not to say 100 megabytes total or per session or directory or anything, just that an individual file cannot be greater than 100 megabytes. You can subscribe and run your own Cloudflare access, and I don't know Cloudflare's costs, but if you just go to Cloudflare and look at the Argo tunnel information, I believe it's all published there. It is, as I recall, extremely reasonable. I was surprised how inexpensive it is for the level of feature and functionality that you get. I think the other part of the question about costs in general for MyWorkDrive, you're probably best to reach out to Rick directly. You know, it would not be fair for me to try and talk about costs here because I'm not an expert.
Right. Yeah. And certainly, yeah, our contact information is readily available, so you can get a hold of me and we can work together on that. Another one, are there plans for MyWorkDrive to map to, I believe that's ODFB, OneDrive. They have some users using both file shares and OneDrive as well.
So we don't connect to OneDrive shares at the current time, although as you saw, we will let you share to OneDrive. We are always looking at expanding the product and taking client suggestions and feedback. So if that's not on the list, we certainly can add it for you. And I think we actually had a slide in your deck, and I may need to hand you back control so you can show that, of some of the things that are on our roadmap.
Right. Right. That would be great when we get done. And then Cloudflare. Yeah, question on Cloudflare that Dan has answered. Cloudflare takes care of the SSL automatically. There was a question.
Yes, it does. I mentioned that really briefly in passing and should have made the point that Cloudflare does, when you use Cloudflare, you do not need to deploy your own SSL certificate in IIS or even edit IIS configuration at all.
Gotcha. Alrighty, that does appear to be that. If you can hand that back to me, Scott, that would be great. I'll finish up with that roadmap slide and go from there.
You bet. You are now the host and
That's
should be
great.
able to share.
So let's do this, and let's do this, and let's do this. And I should be right back. So here we go. Hey, I like it when it works, huh? And let me get this out of the way and go here a little bit bigger. What is on the roadmap? External sharing, B2B collaboration. We have been asked by some major entities interesting in partnering opportunities, external sharing, business-to-business collaboration. At a very high level, that is the ability to invite somebody via email address to share files or folders using the same security. And that's been the challenge, that we want to keep the same security going that we have today, but yet allow that. So that is definitely on the roadmap. I could put Scott on the spot and say, when do you think that'll be ready? But only if he wants to volunteer that at the end. Additional translations are coming. I think Scott alluded to the upload speed improvements. We've already incurred some very significant speed improvements with this release, but we're looking to do more as well.
Yeah, just to be clear about that one, we improved download speed tremendously, and we're going to apply the same improved file transferring logic to the upload process in the next step for that.
Great. And maybe you want to take that 2FA. We're going to do that additional options as well.
Yeah, there are some ideas we have around improving or providing a 2FA alternatives to Duo. Unfortunately, there isn't a universal standard like SAML exists for SSO, which makes that super easy, but we definitely have some ideas for providing that for organizations that have not adopted Duo or included multi-factor in their SSO.
Okay, perfect. Now I'll pretend I'm smart on the rest of these. Add favorites to MapDrive client. That's easy, the same as you saw in the web. It's for nested folders and files to get to them easier. Increase files size limits above 2 gigabytes. We're looking to increase what we currently have. Improve support for clustering. I think that's when you put many servers together. So,
that's right. And as I mentioned, what we're looking at is, as I mentioned, when you're deploying multiple servers, you use that import and export feature to move your config files around, and you map share to a commonly accessible, you map favorites to a commonly accessible share. We're looking to extend the similar functionality of that so we can have shared configuration files.
And we're presently working on the Mac mapped drive update that will bring it more into line of all the features and functions we need to have with that.
Yeah, Apple made a series of updates to the Mac OS that made file operations difficult. So while we've been resolving those, we've gotten a little bit behind in some of the feature parity on the Mac OS client, but we're looking forward to bringing that up to par.
Perfect.
Over the next couple releases.
All righty. Well, we're 6 minutes to the hour now. We had a fair amount of questions. Scott, can you see if there's any more in the chat window? Because since I'm in this.
Yeah, let me take a look. I know, and super appreciative of Dan, who's under the weather and would normally be presenting this information, is covering that for me. And no, it looks like the last question came in was on Cloudflare and the SSL, which we talked about. So
perfect. All righty. Well, then that looks like we can give you 5 minutes back to your day anyway. I want to thank everyone for coming. I appreciate much. Here's the contact information, sales@myworkdrive.com. Also, what's not on here, if you have any technical questions, support@myworkdrive.com, and those will go to our support team, and I get copied as well. So again, thank you very much for allowing us to do this update. And if you'd like to show this or share this information with anyone else, we're going to send out in about 24 hours this entire recording for other people in your organization to look at. Again, thank you very much. Thank you, Scott, and look forward to working with each and every one of you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.